This game's about to die. Like, where could they even take it? There's so much power creep. Like, it's never gonna be.
Okay, is it working now? Test test, 1, 2, 3. This is working? I think so, cool. Since getting back into Yu-Gi-Oh, I'll often find myself opening up YouTube and seeing what a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh YouTubers have to say, whatever they've posted about. And I find myself seeing more and more all these posts that say Yu-Gi-Oh is dying.
The Yu-Gi-Oh game is dying.
Yu-Gi-Oh is doomed.
It's that time of the year again where basically everyone is saying they're quitting Yu-Gi-Oh.
The future of Yu-Gi-Oh was bleak, and all these posts questioning whether or not Yu-Gi-Oh is still I don't know why I decided to do this outside. I'm gonna start recording videos more outside so I can touch grass and get more comfortable on camera. It kind of starts to paint this image of Yu-Gi-Oh that it is a dying game, and every year something could happen that will mean that we won't be able to play the game in the near future. But I can't lie, I don't think that that's true. I don't think that Yu-Gi-Oh is dying, nor do I think that it's gonna die anytime soon. I feel like most Yu-Gi-Oh YouTubers who are talking about, the status of the game and how bad it's becoming are people who are veteran players, essentially. They have been playing the game for a really long time, and they have seen the evolution of the game over years and even possibly decades, depending on, which Yu-Gi-Tuber we're talking about. I think something that a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh YouTubers forget is that there are kind of other perspectives when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh, when it comes to this kind of thing. And I kind of just want to offer a more positive outlook on Yu-Gi-Oh and the state of the game, because I personally don't think it's dying. Now, do not get me wrong, I definitely think that modern Yu-Gi-Oh is a game that has a ton of flaws. The meta, oh my gosh. What the heck was that? It's definitely not at the same place that it was, back in the early 2000s, but it's certainly not dead. In fact, I think now Yu-Gi-Oh is growing. In fact, I'm gonna offer you 3 signs that Yu-Gi-Oh is actually growing and not dying like everyone seems to think. All right. Test test, 1, 2. So the first place you can look is actually the OCG, which is the Japanese version of Yu-Gi-Oh, the kind of Yu-Gi-Oh that they play in Japan. The OCG is actually a great place to look for signs of health in the Yu-Gi-Oh community, because that's where Yu-Gi-Oh was born. It's like the birthplace of Yu-Gi-Oh. The OCG is the OG Yu-Gi-Oh. And out in Japan in the OCG, Yu-Gi-Oh is fine. In fact, a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh YouTubers have commented on just how nice the experience of being a Yu-Gi-Oh fan in Japan is.
Japan brought out these 7-Eleven promos, which were limited promo cards you were able to get from Japan, from the 7-Eleven stores, basically.
And I think the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh is still doing well in Japan is kind of it's not a sign that Yu-Gi-Oh is doing well in the States necessarily, but I do think that Yu-Gi-Oh doing well in Japan is a good thing for people who play in North America. And the reason I say that is because Yu-Gi-Oh is it is a card game. It is also a business, and businesses revolve around making money. Yu-Gi-Oh doing well in Japan is a very good thing for the TCG. Because as long as Yu-Gi-Oh is doing well in Japan, in the place where Yu-Gi-Oh is from, it means that its bills are paid. And as long as Yu-Gi-Oh has its bills paid, there's no reason for them to stop making cards and caring about North America, because North America also makes the money. So as long as in Japan there are cards being printed, here in North America there's also going to be, I'm sorry if it's dark, I'm sitting in the shade because it's really hot outside, but the shade is very nice and there's a nice little breeze going by, so I'm having a good time. As long as the bills are paid for the OCG, that means Yu-Gi-Oh will still be making cards in the TCG. I feel like there's no reason for them to not do that, especially if the TCG just makes them more money. Now, of course, it doesn't speak to, how fun the game is and how much people play the game, but at the very least, I think that as long as the game is popular in the OCG, we don't have anything to worry about here in North America. I think that's it, yeah. I remember a couple months ago or weeks ago, time doesn't make sense to me. There was some guy on TV, like an Olympic runner, so I guess this was last month. After his race, he pulled out a Blue Eyes White Dragon card, and it was making its rounds on social media. And then I remember again, recently, he won another race or something, and this time he pulled out an Exodia card. And then literally just recently, literally just last week, Zayn Malik was in a Yu-Gi-Oh event. And I mention all of these things because there is And I mention all these things because there is just so much happening in the Yu-Gi-Oh community that suggests that it is growing rather than falling out of favor, right? Like myself, right? Well, I am a new Yu-Gi-Oh player. I just started playing, or I just got back into the game last December, I think. So I've only been playing for, I've been playing for less than a year now. And I don't think that I'm an anomaly. I don't think that I am just a regular person who just happened to pick up Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'm sure there are tons of other people who are doing the same thing. And I have a lot of friends around me who also have gotten into the game recently. You look at all these newer Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTubers that are popping up, and the Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTubers who are still posting Yu-Gi-Oh! Content and making money off of it. There's just so much happening in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community that makes me think that, like, if anything, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is experiencing like a bit of a renaissance now. I just see more and more of it everywhere that I go, and that could just be because that now that I'm playing and I just notice it more. A little confirmation bias, but I don't think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is dying in any way, shape, or form. I just don't think that it is. Other series, right? Other series that came out around the same time as Yu-Gi-Oh! Like Bakugan and Beyblade, right? Those are games that I still hear people talking about all the time. At least in my circles. Like I was at a party the other day and someone was just randomly talking about both Bakugan and Beyblade unprompted. I know that's all like anecdotal evidence, but it's like, from my perspective, that's like, if games like that were nowhere near as popular as Yu-Gi-Oh! Are still getting talked about to this day, I mean, like, yeah, okay, that's good for that. Wait a second. Yeah, cool, okay. Something that I think a lot of people who play this game don't realize is that, like, the competitive scene doesn't necessarily Something that I think a lot of people don't realize is that the competitive scene doesn't necessarily reflect how most people play the game. And that's one of the biggest issues that I have with people who say that, oh, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is ending and Yu-Gi-Oh! Is in a terrible place. I think they're arguing purely from a competitive sense. Like, they're arguing from the sense of, like, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta and the way that tournaments happen and how the best decks perform and all these things. And in my opinion, this kind of viewpoint is almost missing the point of Yu-Gi-Oh! When we talk about old Yu-Gi-Oh! And the game that we grew up with a lot of times, people will often bring up the idea of playground Yu-Gi-Oh! Rules are really loose, we didn't know about phases, we kind of just like played with each other and had fun and just had a good time. And I feel like this is the core of Yu-Gi-Oh! And not the competitive scene. I feel like the competitive scene kind of just exists as like a showcase. Honestly, if I'm being real with you, I feel like Konami does not care about the competitive scene of Yu-Gi-Oh! I think that is where they make their money because, again, the competitive decks are the ones that cost all the money, they're the ones that win all the tournaments and blah, 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 blah. But then again, if you want to build like a pet deck of cards that you just kind of like, that you've acquired over the years, you don't have to spend $1 million for that. And this is the kind of Yu-Gi-Oh! That I think is fine. The non-competitive, just have a good time with your friends kind of Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's another thing about the game that like I think all the time. Like when I play against somebody who plays the most annoying meta deck, the most annoying busted broken meta deck, and assembles a board of cards where they've been playing for like 40 minutes and I barely got to play a single card and the game isn't even a two-player game at that point, I'm not thinking, oh, Yu-Gi-Oh! Sucks. I'm thinking, fuck this guy for playing like a jackass. And that's the thing, right? I know there's the whole statement of like, oh, don't hate the player, hate the game, but I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Was very much like the I fucking hate the player and not the game. Yu-Gi-Oh! At this point is so old, there are a million ways to break the game, there are a million ways to like have FTKs, or a million ways to play the game in a way that is win at all costs, but you can also play the game where it's just like have fun with your friends. And I feel like that's something that people just forget exists. And when we talk about, Yu-Gi-Oh's dying and the game is, in a terrible place and blah, 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 I think people are just arguing from the perspective of the competitive player and not just a casual person. There is a lot going on right now. Another Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTuber made a video a little while back called, I forget the title, but it was something to the tune of like, veteran Yu-Gi-Oh! Players just don't understand new players. And it was kind of talking about how a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTubers don't really understand the mindset of a non-competitive new player. And I think that video is very worth a watch because that is 100% correct. I think that like playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And you're only worried about like the meta decks and what's powerful and what's not and all these things, you kind of miss the forest for the trees, I think. a lot of us really just want to play a card game. We don't care about Fiendsmith or Snake Eye or Yubel or whatever the meta decks are. We just want to have fun. And I think that's something that like so many like doomer Yu-Gi-Oh YouTubers miss. The game isn't dying. Competitive Yu-Gi-Oh just sucks. And competitive Yu-Gi-Oh has always sucked. I don't know. I just kind of want to offer like a more positive take on Yu-Gi-Oh because I don't think the game is dying. In fact, I think the game is kind of growing at a rate faster than it has in a long time, and I'm personally excited to see where it's gonna go. So yeah, I don't know. This is just a quick little rant about the state of Yu-Gi-Oh. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, please subscribe. I'm very close to 1,000 subs, and I would really love that. You guys are great and stuff, and I like Yu-Gi-Oh and all that good stuff. So yeah, hope you have a good rest of your day, and I will catch you later. Bye-bye.
Stereophonic sound for the home is recorded on 2 separate tracks, each one giving special emphasis to certain sections of the orchestra, as heard from those positions.